Do you have high blood sugars and can't figure out why? And ask yourself, well, I didn't eat anything to cause this or do anything crazy for this high blood sugar to happen. Let's dive into 4 unexpected or not so typical things that can spike blood sugar. These blood sugar spikers aren't the typical ones other diabetes channels are sharing, but things I wish I knew about years ago. It definitely would have saved me some grief. I will also share the strategies I use to manage the blood sugar spikes I'm going to talk about. My name's Trevor, and I've lived with type 1 diabetes for 42 years, raised 2 type 1 kids, and worked in the field of diabetes education, and hope to save you time managing your diabetes by sharing my experience and tips I picked up along the way. So the first atypical or unusual thing that causes stubborn high blood sugars or spikes for me are road trips. I recently took a road trip and drove 6 hours one way to visit my partner, which reminded me of the challenges faced as a younger diabetic when sitting for long periods of time. I remember taking trips when younger and the crazy high blood sugars that would happen, not knowing how to prevent them back then or what to do about them. So you're probably thinking, well, isn't it obvious that your blood sugar is going to rise when you're sitting all day or for a long period of time? Well, true, but I've noticed that it's stubbornly high when driving or traveling. And I think it's likely due to not moving at all. I mean, in the office job I have, I can get up every so often to stretch. I can pump my calves, I can do free squats, lunges. I can get up as often as I want to get the blood flowing and move around. This just isn't possible while driving a car. Unless you pull over every hour or so, which means a 6-hour trip would take an extra hour and a half, or way too long for me to reach my destination. So to prevent the high blood sugars on road trips, I try to get a good night's rest the night before. This leads to less stress hormones, better response to the insulin I'm taking, less insulin resistance basically, and just much more easier to control my blood sugar. Stay hydrated. I know it's pretty obvious, but something you have to do. Bring a water bottle, sip on it through the whole trip. Skip the breakfast sandwiches at the drive-thru and focus on protein. I try to bring beef jerky snacks, lower carb nuts like macadamians, G-strings. So work with your team to increase insulin during longer trips. This is very individual. I increase my pre-meal insulin dose by about 20% to make sure I have dextrose tabs nearby. Obviously I'm driving. I don't want to have a low while driving. And in that way I can just top them up. Test often, and if possible, use a continuous glucose monitor. That's what I use. Now this is not medical advice. It's simply my journey with diabetes and what works for me. And like I said earlier, you pick something up, take it to your team, check it out. Number 2 atypical thing is feeding the wrong activity. Have you ever exercised and had that post-workout spike or been told to eat carb before all types of exercise and then had a major high blood sugar afterwards? Well, old advice was to feed activity, especially with type 1 diabetes, which is totally outdated advice now. I remember hitting the gym as a young teen and chowing down a large banana for fear that I would drop low. So once I started self-testing my blood sugar, I figured out that if I'm only weight training or boxing, I don't require any pre-workout carbohydrate. But if I'm doing aerobic activity, I need carbohydrate before, often during exercise, and sometimes a little bit after. So this is my experience. Remember, to figure out what works for you and your diabetes, you need to test, and consult with your medical team. I'm really curious to know. Or if you have other ideas for videos you want me to talk about, throw it in the comment. So atypical thing number 3 that causes blood sugar spikes is the link between stress and blood sugars. This one took a while to figure out, and in a bit I'll share why it was a challenge to figure out and hard to manage. I always knew that stress from a virus like the flu or an infection causes high blood sugar, but I wanted to understand how everyday stressors impact blood sugars. So I had the light bulb moment about stress and its impact on my blood sugars early on, but it was not really talked about in the medical field with diabetes that much anyways in the early days like it is now. Not to mention without blood sugar testing, I couldn't prove or understand it. When I started testing and monitoring my blood sugars routinely, remember I had diabetes for almost 8 years before routine blood sugar monitors were available and accepted by diabetes doctors for patient use. I did start to notice, once I was able to test, that during stressful periods, like after an argument or during university exams, my blood sugars were stubbornly high and incredibly hard to control. So there's the link, right? This was also noticeable with my A1C results. Over the years, I noticed that these would trend up during periods of high stress, like during school especially. I also noticed too, when I started to work shift work, doing nights as a nurse, that blood sugars were incredibly hard to control. So I don't work nights anymore. The surprising one was testing post-car accident and how quickly after that accident, my blood sugar spiked. Crazy. I did a video on that. I'll share it at the end. So strategies I use are pretty common for stress management. Being mindful, eating well, staying active. So not so typical item number 4, so-called free food choices. So have you ever eaten a large salad and wondered why your blood sugar spikes a couple hours later, even though it's supposed to be carb-free? Or have a piece of chicken, same thing happens, with no carb. Well, me too. This one took a long time for me to figure out and to feel comfortable taking insulin to cover proteins, etc. So old school advice, back when I was taught about diabetes, was to eat as much free choices as you want and only bolus for the obvious carb-rich choices. So I could eat as much salad, cucumbers, broccoli, cauliflower, zucchini, celery, you name it, pretty much as I wanted to, meaning that I didn't have to calculate the insulin to cover that food. I've discovered that this isn't the case. And through trial and error and a lot of testing, figured out that I require insulin to cover the so-called carb-free foods, including protein. But please hit the like button, subscribe, and most importantly, leave me a comment. I'd like to start the dialogue to let me know what spikes your blood sugar. If you want to learn more about the carb-free foods or how stress messes with your blood sugar, check out my videos here. Bye for now.